We're all being lied to, and in this video I expose the truth about tools, so stick around. Alright, so I am going to show you tools from 3 different tool companies, and I want you to tell me what they all have in common. The first one is Hart Tools. These tools are only available at Walmart, and they are basic and inexpensive and would definitely be considered a lower tier tool. Then we have Ryobi. This is probably a mid-tier tool, although some would still argue that it's a lower tier tool. Ryobi is sold exclusively at the Home Depot. And then there is Milwaukee, which is a top tier tool sold all over, and arguably one of the best tool brands on the market. So tell me, what do these brands all have in common? Well, I'll tell you. These tools are all made by the same company. That company, Tektronic Industries, or TTI. Have you ever heard of them? You probably haven't, but you've definitely heard of some of the other brands that they own, brands like Stiletto, Hoover, Oreck, and Dirt Devil. There are some other similar companies like this too. Take Bosch Tools, for example. They also own brands like Dremel and Diablo, Freud, and Rotozip, and I could go on and on and on with other tool companies. So what's going on here? Well, it's a fascinating story that has to do with history, economics, patents, international relations, and of course, money. There is a lot to unpack here, but to really understand it, we need to know how we got here. So in the early 1900s, when tractors on farms and cars in cities first became widely available and started to wear down a bit, people needed tools to fix them. And that was how a lot of early tool companies got their start. In fact, that's exactly how Snap-on was started in 1920. They invented a ratchet attachment that would snap on, and it was a big hit with mechanics and people who needed to work on their own cars. Then with the expansion of the industrial age and as more and more consumer products with mechanical parts were being purchased and added to people's homes, things like washing machines and dishwashers.
Just drop dirty clothes in here and all the hard work is done for you.
The need for regular people to have their own tools expanded. Not only that, but you had new jobs pop up, things that didn't exist before, things like repairman or a mechanic, and these professionals needed tools too. World War II happened around this time, and during the war, the government needed tools on a massive scale, both to build new war machines and then also to maintain them. This benefited a lot of tool manufacturing companies who were able to produce for the war effort. Also during that time, there were millions of soldiers and other people who were trained to use these tools to maintain all of the jeeps and trucks and ships and planes. And those people came home to a country that needed to build homes to house them. Power tools became popular and a building boom took place. The economy of the 1950s was red hot. The United States had only 6% of the world's population, but was churning out 50% of the world's goods. And it was a great time for American tool brands. And that continued throughout the 1960s. But things started to change in the 70s. Europe and parts of Asia were beginning to recover from the war and were building their own manufacturing bases. There were economic reforms in China in the late 1970s and early 80s that allowed for foreign companies to do business in China, and that changed the world. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Tecovas. Tecovas is a company that makes amazing boots, both work boots and Western boots, and I've got a pair of each and I think they're both fantastic. The great thing about these boots is that they're comfortable right out of the box. You can tell that they're very well made. The leather quality is fantastic. I love the design of the Western boots and how comfortable they are. The work boots are also great because of features like the composite safety toe for protection. They're also waterproof and have other safety features like being oil and slip resistant, and they offer protection from electrical hazards. Tecovas boots are handmade and use premium leather, and I'm sure that these are going to last for years. So if you're in the market for a new pair of boots, check out Tecovas. You can click on the link in my description or scan the QR code on the screen to get your new favorite pair of boots today. And like I say, they make both fantastic work boots and great Western boots, and so there's a lot to choose from. Again, check the link in my description or the QR code on the screen. And thanks again to Tecovas for sponsoring this video. So like I said, just after World War II was a golden age for tools. Many tool companies were started and many others expanded, but things were changing. The 1970s were a rough time economically. There were trade embargoes, sky-high interest rates, and a flailing economy. This is when things started to change for a lot of tool makers, and a few of them really struggled. In the 1980s, we started to see a lot of tool company mergers and acquisitions, and that continued for decades. Stanley Tool Works, which was originally founded in the 1800s, purchased brands like Mac Tools and Proto. Another large company, Black & Decker, purchased brands like Dewalt, Kwikset, and others. Stanley Tool Works and Black & Decker later merged together in 2010 to form Stanley Black & Decker, and it's currently one of the largest tool companies in the world, controlling brands like Stanley and Black & Decker, of course, but also Dewalt, Craftsman, as well as other brands like Irwin, Bostitch, Porter Cable, Mac Tools, and many others. It was around this same time in the 1980s when tool companies realized that they could build factories offshore and reduce their expenses. This would make them more competitive and more successful, and that's what a lot of them did. Now that history is all very interesting, but to really understand what's going on here and to understand the truth about tools today, we need to talk about OEMs. Now, OEM is an acronym that stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. And essentially it references a company that is contracted to build a piece of equipment on behalf of another company. The way that it works is that the tool company designs their own product. They also own the patents and the designs, and then they send those designs and their specifications for materials and tolerances and things like that to the OEM. The OEM then produces the tools according to the specifications that they were given by the tool company. The tool company then slaps their logo on it and then ships it back to the US to sell. Now, in the early days of tools, most companies did all of the manufacturing themselves. And in some cases, they may have used a local machine shop or other tool and die maker. But over time, the allure of cheap manufacturing overseas was too much for these companies to bear. And so most of them began making at least some of their parts in China or Taiwan. Using cheap Asian OEMs not only helped on costs, but also allowed them greater flexibility. They could pivot without the expense of retooling, and the OEMs could manufacture for more than one company. In many cases, they used the same tooling for those other companies as well. In fact, the company that I mentioned in the beginning, TTI, started out in Hong Kong in the 1980s as an OEM building drills for Sears Craftsman tools. This benefited Craftsman tools because the cost to manufacture was less, and benefited the customer because the cost of the tools was ultimately less. Over time, TTI grew so large that they were no longer just an OEM, but they became a large tool conglomerate owning many other brands. And that is one of the ways that tool companies have lied to us. There is no such thing as a Dewalt tool company. There is no Ryobi tool company. These companies are now large conglomerates that own multiple brands and often manufacture them in the same OEM factories. And that is one of the most interesting things about these OEMs. In fact, check out these reciprocating saws right here. These saws all look similar because they're all made in the same factory. This includes brands like Bosch, Black & Decker, Ryobi, Skill, and others. These are all manufactured in a factory in Zhejiang, China called Ningbo Gunmai, also known as Keystone Electrical. On their website, they have pictures of the generic tools that they can manufacture. And if you look closely, these tools look very similar to tools that are sold by other brands on the market. There are other tool manufacturers out there like this, other OEMs. In one of my other recent videos, I showed these pictures of belt sanders from companies that all use the same OEM. There are countless examples just like this. Here's another thing about these OEMs though. Many of them today also operate as ODMs, which is an acronym for Original Design Manufacturer. This means that they not only manufacture products based upon the designs of others, but they also come up with their own designs. That means that a tool company could wholly outsource both the design and the production of their product, only to slap their name on it at the end of the process and call it their own. And it happens all the time. And the main reason why that is possible is because of patents. Let me show you an example of what I mean. Here is a page from the Sears catalog from 1943 showing a belt and disc sander. Now, if you look at the sanders that I showed earlier, they are remarkably similar. For this particular tool, there really has not been a lot of innovation, and most of the patents used to produce a tool like this have likely all expired. And that's how they're able to design and build a tool like this for all these other companies, because most of those patents are in the public domain. So what does this mean for you, the tool consumer and the tool user? Should this change the way that you shop tools or buy tools? Well, let me make a few things clear. Just because something was built in the same factory does not necessarily mean that it's exactly the same. The designs may be very similar, perhaps even identical, but some tool companies may opt to use higher quality steel or aluminum, and another tool manufacturer may opt to use a plastic part in place of a metal part. One company may demand higher quality control, and another company may be okay with higher levels of defects. But that said, in my opinion, and in most cases when you're looking at the mid-tier to lower tier tools, it probably doesn't matter all that much. This tool from Wen is probably identical to this tool from Ryobi and this tool from Harbor Freight. So in that case, it is probably best to go with what's the cheapest or whatever your brand preference is. The whole reason that these companies have multiple brands that make the same types of tools is to capture more of the market. It's very similar to what car companies do. Hyundai owns the brands Genesis, Hyundai, and Kia. And Honda and Toyota both own their own luxury brands of Acura and Lexus. It's a way for them to capture customers who have different preferences. Customers who may be more price conscious or less price conscious. Customers who may want the higher end or don't care and would be fine with the lower end. It helps them capture all levels of the market, and that helps them sell more. TTI sells Hart at Walmart and Ryobi at Home Depot to capture the middle and lower end of the market, and then sells Milwaukee everywhere else to capture the higher end. It's a very common practice in a lot of different products. So as a consumer, when does it matter? Well, with higher end tools, you're gonna find more innovations. You're gonna find more features, more unique items or unique designs that set them apart from their competitors and set them apart from the mid or lower tier tools. But that also comes with a price. As an example, SawStop is a very innovative tool that was designed to make table saws safer and still holds many patents. Although that is another very interesting story for another day. But the SawStop brand was purchased a few years ago by a German tool company called TTS, or Tool Technik Systems. This is the same company that owns Festool and other brands. Now, Festool is another brand with some very innovative products. These tools are not cheap, and while I've never used them because I can't afford them, I have heard that they are incredible. And that's where I think it really matters, is on the high end. If you want certain tools with certain features and you can afford it, then on the high end, go with the brand and the tools that have those features, and that's where you're gonna find them. There's one other thing to talk about here, and that is that in just the past couple of years, a ton of new tool brands are coming on the market and really flooding the market. They're mostly sold on sites like Temu or their own sites, but occasionally you'll find them on sites like Amazon. The reason that this is happening now is because all of those ODMs and OEMs are wising up to the fact that they don't necessarily need the big tool brands. They can come up with their own designs, they can come up with their own brands and sell directly to US customers on platforms like AliExpress and Temu. These come directly from their factories and can often be sold at cheaper prices because there isn't the added cost of the established brand. It will be interesting over the next few years to see how many of these tool companies stick around and what that added competition means for the more established brands. Something to look out for sure. Something else to look out for is the impact of tariffs and the potential higher costs of goods coming from China and other places. It may encourage more manufacturing in the US, but the problem is that we really don't have the manufacturing base for it currently. And so it's gonna take time to build that. In fact, a while back, I made a video about Craftsman tools and how they tried to reshore their manufacturing, but were unable to. I'll leave a link in the description if you wanna check that one out. So here's the truth about tools. Tool brands are a facade. Most companies are owned by large conglomerates and outsource the manufacturing of many of their products to the same factories in Asia. When looking at lower end tools, it probably doesn't matter which one you buy. So focus on other things like price, warranty, and maybe battery platform, things like that. But when it comes to the higher end tools with more features, that's when it really does matter. So go with the tools that fit your use case, the tools that you like, and the tools you can afford. But I want to know your opinion. What is your favorite tool brand and why? What are the tools that you always buy, and what are the tools that you refuse to buy, the tools that you avoid? Leave me a comment and let me know. I love to read your comments. I learn a lot from them. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.